I was clerking in the Court of Chancery, and Chancellor Allen was discussing great advocacy, both written and oral. And he said, it's always about your credibility, and that you always, as an advocate, you always want to be sure that you're right and that you're not misleading in any way. And he said, if you be like Bruce Stargatt, when every word that Bruce writes, every word that he says, you can trust and take to the bank and go from there. And that is my first recollection of what a great lawyer Bruce was and what a kind of reputation he had.
I think it's fair to say that everything that I ever learned about the craft of being a lawyer, about the craft of legal analysis, writing, proper expression as a lawyer, and the ethics of being a lawyer in Delaware, I learned from him.
He was a source of strength, but strength in the quietest of ways, in the most confident way. And he was always able, at least for me, to reassure me that no matter how little time we had to accomplish some job, no matter how difficult it seemed, that we'd do it. We'd get it done, everything would work out, and it always did. And I remember him constantly saying to me, both politics is the art of the possible, and life is the art of the possible. And I think that's a nice phrase, life is the art of the possible. But for him, the possible was probably higher and aspired to a higher level than for many people.
One young, ambitious politician came to see him and wanted to get his advice on whether he should run for a particular office. And Bruce looked at him over his glasses and probably through the cigar smoke that was always around him and said, son, you're just pissing in the wind. And that turned out to be the young man who won that Senate race against all odds and is now Vice President of the United States.
And I enjoyed the years I worked with him tremendously. He taught me a lot, very witty, an exceptional writer. I had my job security by the fact that he was woefully inept with technology of any sort. He had a handheld recorder that he would hand back to me and say, I need a new one because the tape was full, and did not know how to take it out, and that amused me tremendously.
Nothing happened at Young Conaway from 1971 May, when I got here, through the 70s and 80s that Bruce didn't approve one way or the other. He was the leader of the firm. Jim Conaway, Mr. Young, Mr. Taylor, all had different strengths and different weaknesses, but Bruce was really the leader that we looked to. If there was a problem, we looked to Bruce. If there was a decision to be made, we looked to Bruce.
Bruce had an unbelievable combination of both, really technical brilliance in terms of corporate law, but there was also, he combined that with a practicality and judgment that was incredible. He was also, I felt, and I've talked to him and I know he would disagree, but I felt that he was fearless. But yet, there are some people who are fearless and take unnecessary risks. But Bruce combined that fearlessness with incredible judgment. And that's what made him just a fantastic lawyer. And I've never met anybody who had all of those characteristics before or after.
I come into the partners meeting. There were a relatively small number of partners at that time, and there was a chair next to Bruce that was open. And I sort of sat down and said, oh great, I'll sit next to Bruce. So I sit down and they start the meeting, and Bruce takes out this foot-long cigar and lights it up. And I mean, this smelly, awful cigar. And then I realized, why nobody sat next to Bruce at the partners meetings.
Everybody knows Bruce had a first-class mind, and his ability to help me penetrate the murky intersection of human behavior and the law and motivations of clients in courts, was vital to the success of my practice. I don't think I would have been able to get anywhere near as far as I've gotten if I didn't have somebody like Bruce, and in particular Bruce in the early days, sharing with me his wisdom and his insight into what makes people tick, what it is to be a great lawyer, and how to manage a practice.
He sort of taught you to take everything seriously and treat the law and your cases and your clients with respect. And it wasn't anything he ever said sort of overtly in that regard, but he sort of always conducted himself as a serious lawyer, and it rubbed off on you. And it still has managed to stay with me, you know, for 20 years. So his influence is always there. He's kind of always hovering around you, that, you know, making you do your best.
The night before, he said, well, you know, I probably could use some time driving down to Dover to review my notes. Would you mind driving me and the general counsel down to Dover? Well, this was a great idea, but I had this little old Toyota at the time that we really weren't going to be squeezing into. He was driving I think a 240 or 260Z. That was also going to be a little tricky. So he said, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. I'll get a vehicle. And he shows up with his wife Barbara's Jaguar, which was sort of a dream car to me at that point. But I'd never driven one, and I thought, oh, this is wonderful. As if there isn't enough pressure, you know, with the legal side of this case. Now I've got to get all these folks and this car back in one piece after this argument. But I appreciate his confidence, and we made it. Not only got the car back, but we prevailed.
I'm being considered for this position here at Young Conaway, and I called Bruce aside at the Racket Club, and I said, you know, I'm being interviewed for the administrator position over at Young Conaway, and he said, yeah, I know that. And I said, well, do you think there's anything that I should be focusing on when I'm being interviewed? And he said, nah, don't worry about it, you'll be fine. So you know, eventually I got hired for the job, but I've always thought that if Bruce didn't think I was up to the job, that he could have killed my chances real easy. And since he didn't, it's always been my fantasy that he helped me in getting the job. Whether he even said a word to anybody or not, I don't know. And I've never asked anybody because I don't want to spoil the fantasy to find out that he never said a peep.
Bruce was the racquetball king of Young Conaway. And when I got here as a young associate, I guess I was 30 or so, it was made known to me that he was the king. And so we arranged for a match. And our styles were completely incompatible because Bruce was a surgeon on the racquetball court, and he didn't have to move very much and would put you away with a kill shot, while I was a very sloppy racquetball player and relied on a very large wingspan and a lot of running and stamina. And we played 2 games, and I beat Bruce at both. And they were very long games, very tiring games, and they didn't play to Bruce's style at all. And I thought that was it. It was a very long game, it was it. And Bruce said, oh no, we're playing another one. And I guess it was kind of similar to the Rocky story. And I did not cut him any slack in that 3rd game, and he played as hard as anybody could play, and he beat me.
One thing about Bruce, he was a very good athlete. And I remember when Barry Willoughby and I started playing racquetball, you know, we were pretty bad. and we'd go over there and, you know, bounce off the wall and stuff. And then we'd see Bruce in what I guess they call a challenge court. He would go over there with these guys 30 years younger than he was, and he'd just, like, you know, hit it this way, and they'd run over here, and then he'd hit it over there, and he would, you know, he was just a really good athlete.
Bruce decided to ask me if I would play racquetball with him, and somehow I think he'd gotten word that I played racket sports, and I said sure. And Bruce decided that this was a good way to try to provide a little guidance. In the end, Bruce ended up becoming my mentor, but in the early days I didn't really understand what was going on. I was incredibly flattered and rather intimidated by the prospect of playing racquetball with Bruce. And I'm fairly confident that had I not been able to give him a decent game and you know, win a few games, he would have abandoned the project altogether and figured I could sink or swim on my own.
I taught Bruce how to play racquetball. He was playing handball at the time. I was playing racquetball. I was actually the champion of our law school racquetball competition. So I figured, you know, a guy that's never played before, this should be pretty easy. Anyway, we were at the Y, we go up to the courts, we start playing on the courts, and I start to smell cigar smoke. And I'm sort of looking around thinking there must be somebody smoking a cigar in the gallery that looks down over the court. And it gets stronger, the more we played, and then I realized it was coming from Bruce, and I don't know whether it was the heavy breathing in his lungs or whether the perspiration, but we played those first games with the aroma of cigars all around us, and I thought it was really a shrewd tactic on his part to try to disarm me or disable me from winning. And I think I won the first game or two, but before we were done, he had beaten me, and before my career was over, he was regularly beating me and moving on to greater challenges.
I was proud to know him, and now that we're in this courthouse, I'm proud of the firm I work for that he helped build, that in the end brought me back home to my courthouse where I worked for 20 years. So just a great man.
And another thing that Bruce did that is a tremendous leadership trait, and if they write books about it, is he led by example.
You know, I think we're all, you know, better off. We're all enriched by, you know, his presence.
Probably I had been at Young Conaway maybe 3 or 4 years, and one of the legal newspapers happened to profile me, and they asked, one of the questions was, who was the lawyer that you most respected or looked up to, something along those lines. And even after 4 or 5 years, having only known Bruce professionally in that capacity, he was the one that I mentioned. And if I was asked that question today, it would still be the same.
Is the last time I met with Bruce, at the time we were at the house when the award was given, and he first shared with me the diagnosis or potential, I think at that point it was still potential diagnosis about his condition. And I was sort of, oh no, you know, everything's going to be fine, you've always beaten the odds. And he looked at me and I don't know if he smiled, but there was this very serene look on his face, and he said, David, I've had a good and a long life. And I took 2 things away from that. One is that we should all hope to have good, long lives. And the other was that even at that moment, when the relationship between us should probably have been one of me comforting him in his hour of need, the last words he spoke to me was he comforting me by telling me not to worry, that he's had a long and good life. And that sort of was classically Bruce. He was always a source of reassurance, and those are the things I admired most about him.
He was a tremendous presence in this law firm over his entire career. And it wasn't by accident. I mean, Bruce was a very deliberate, planning type of person. And I remember in the early 70s hearing him talk about the type of law firm he wanted to build. And he did. And very few people in this or any other business can say they've accomplished what he did.
And I want to tell you how proud he was of all of you and how much he loved you, and to let you know how much the staff loved him. He was wonderful.
He always had family photos. One of those photos was from a trip, I think perhaps to Italy, when he and Barbara had taken the entire family. And it's just classic. It shows the children and grandchildren in different windows from a hotel in Italy with signs in the various windows saying, "We heart Bruce." And that really does sum it up, I think. I mean, certainly from the family, but from all of his colleagues as well.
I used to talk to Bruce a fair amount about books and things and books that we liked, and I just finished one called The Art of Fielding, and there was a line in the closing there that sort of summed up somebody's life, and I thought it really applied to Bruce, and I'm going to read it here because I really think it does justice to the man. It says, "You told me once that a soul isn't something a person is born with, but something that must be built by effort and error, study and love. And you did that with more dedication than most, that work of building a soul, not for your own benefit, but for the benefit of those who knew you, which is partly why your death is so hard for us. It's hard to accept that a soul like yours, which took a lifetime to build, could cease to exist. It makes us angry and furious at the universe not to have you here. But of course your soul does exist because you gave of it so unstintingly. It exists in each of us, and for that we'll always be grateful." And to Bruce's family, I would just say that we were really grateful for him, for the family sharing Mr. Stargatt with us.